All right, get ready, because today we're diving headfirst into a mystery that's baffled some of the brightest minds for centuries, the Voynich Manuscript. We're talking about a book, or, well, a codex, I guess, that's older than Shakespeare, filled with writing that's completely indecipherable, and the illustrations. Let's just say they wouldn't look out of place in a Salvador Dali painting.
It really is the ultimate cold case in history. It's been examined and studied for almost 600 years, and still no one can definitively say what it says, who created it, or even what it's really all about.
It's like this incredibly cryptic scavenger hunt across, what, about 240 pages. And to top it off, we think there might be another 30 or so pages lost somewhere out there. You flip through it, and it seems like it has sections for plants, for astronomy, for astrology. But then suddenly, things take a sharp turn into, let's call it, bathing ladies territory.
Oh yeah, those bathing ladies.
Yeah.
That's where the Voynich Manuscript really ramps up the mystery. I mean, we're talking about repeated drawings of naked women just hanging out in these weird tubs. And these tubs, they look like, well, intestines. And they're all filled with this unidentified green liquid. Definitely not your typical historical imagery.
Yep. Not at all. And then there's all these other strange images scattered throughout, like dragons munching on herbs, or a random sketch of what looks like a corpse. There's even a whole castle drawn on one of those fold-out pages. It's like someone took everything bizarre from medieval life and just crammed it all into one book.
It's that crazy mix of unreadable text and bizarre visuals that has made the Voynich Manuscript such a magnet for speculation. Some say it's a medical textbook. Others think it's all about alchemy. Then you've got those convinced it's a secret message from some kind of secret society. And of course, you can't forget about the folks who just think it's a big elaborate hoax.
So what are we going to do today? We're going to become Voynich Manuscript detectives, that's what. We're going to follow the manuscript's trail through history. We're going to try to figure out what makes it so darn captivating. And we're going to try our best to separate the facts from the fiction. Now, will we crack the code today? Probably not, but hopefully we'll at least get a better grasp on what we do know. And why, even after all this time, the Voynich Manuscript still has such a hold on us.
Yeah, you know what I think is really fascinating about the whole thing? It's how the Voynich Manuscript has managed to capture the public imagination, especially since the internet came along. You got all these online communities popping up, completely dedicated to solving this mystery. People from all walks of life are throwing their hats into the ring, trying to crack the code.
It's like the ultimate internet puzzle, right? Except this one's been around for centuries. But before we go full internet sleuth on this thing, let's lay down some groundwork, shall we?
Okay, so first, let's talk about the structure. The manuscript seems to be divided into sections, kind of like chapters in a book. Each one seems to focus on a different theme. You've got the botanical section, which is the biggest one. It's full of super detailed drawings of plants. But here's the kicker. A lot of these plants haven't been identified. It's like looking at a plant encyclopedia from a completely different world.
Ooh, I like that. A medieval field guide to an alien ecosystem. But it gets even weirder.
Oh yeah, way weirder. Then you've got the cosmology and astrology sections. This is where we start seeing some familiar symbols, like zodiac signs. And there are these diagrams that look like medieval star charts. It's clear that whoever created this thing, they were really into the cosmos.
So let me get this straight. We've got a mysterious author who's into botany, astronomy, maybe even dabbled in a bit of astrology. Sounds like someone I'd want to grab a drink with. But then, of course, we get to the infamous bathing ladies. So, expert speaker, what's your take on those?
Honestly, it's anyone's guess. Some scholars think they could be linked to alchemy somehow, like symbolic representations of purification or transformation. Others say there might be a connection to medieval medicine, like depictions of therapeutic baths. But the truth is, there's no solid evidence to back up any of those theories.
Maybe the author just really enjoyed drawing bath time. Hey, an artist's got to do what an artist's got to do, right? But then we've got the herbs and vessels section. This one seems a bit more straightforward, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, this one's a little more down to earth. You've got these drawings of various herbs, and next to each herb is what looks like a storage container, the kind they would use in medieval Europe. It's possible that these are instructions for preparing or storing some kind of herbal remedies.
Which would make sense if we're leaning towards the medical text theory. And last but not least, we have the recipes section. This one's basically just a huge block of text, not many pictures at all.
This is where those trying to decipher the manuscript really hit a wall. The text is super dense, and without any visuals to give you clues, it's incredibly difficult to make any sense of it. It's almost like the author intentionally made this section extra difficult to decipher, like they wanted to keep these secrets hidden.
Okay, so we've got our mystery manuscript laid out like some bizarre encyclopedia of the unknown. But the question is, how did this book even end up in the hands of people who could actually study it? Let's rewind the clock a few centuries and see if we can trace its journey, shall we?
All right, so our first confirmed sighting takes us all the way back to 1665. There's this letter from a Bohemian doctor and alchemist named Jan Mark Marcy. He sends this letter, along with the manuscript itself, to a really famous Jesuit scholar in Rome. His name was Athanasius Kircher.
Hold on a sec. So our mystery book ends up with a Jesuit scholar. Was this Kircher guy like the 17th century version of a code breaker?
Well, this Kircher guy, he wasn't just any scholar. He was what you'd call a polymath, a real Renaissance man. He knew a little bit about everything: Egyptology, linguistics, music theory, you name it. And he was actually pretty famous for his attempts to decipher Egyptian hieroglyphs. So it makes sense that Marcy would think, hey, this guy, he's probably our best shot at figuring this thing out. Yeah, if you've got a mysterious book, Kircher's probably the guy to call, right? So what exactly does Marcy say about the manuscript in this letter? Is he freaking out about it?
He's definitely intrigued, that's for sure. He tells Kircher that he inherited the manuscript from a friend, and he really believes that Kircher's the only one smart enough to figure it out. He even mentions that copies were sent to Kircher before, but he never got a response. It's like the manuscript was already starting to get a reputation for being, well, impossible to understand.
So even back then, it was this enigma, this book full of unanswered questions. I love it. But I bet there's more to the story, right? There's always more. Oh, there's definitely more. Marcy mentions a claim he heard from a Dr. Raphael, who said the manuscript once belonged to Emperor Rudolph II. And get this, Rudolph supposedly paid 600 ducats for it. That's a king's ransom, even back then.
Wait, an emperor owned this book? Our little codex was running in royal circles. Who was this Rudolph II character, and why would he be interested in something like the Voynich Manuscript?
What Rudolph II was, let's just say, a unique individual. He was the Holy Roman Emperor in the late 1500s and early 1600s, ruled over a huge chunk of Europe. But he wasn't exactly your typical ruler. He was much more interested in scholarship, in art, and, yes, even the occult. He wasn't all that interested in actually running an empire.
So he'd rather spend his time with alchemists and astrologers than generals and diplomats. Sounds like my kind of guy. I can totally see why he'd be drawn to a weird and mysterious manuscript.
Exactly. Rudolph was known for being a bit melancholy, kind of secretive, and he was absolutely obsessed with collecting books, especially anything related to alchemy. He would spend insane amounts of money on rare and unusual objects, especially if they had anything to do with alchemy, astrology, or the natural world.
So it sounds like the Voynich manuscript would have been right up his alley. But how did he even get his hands on it? And who is this Dr. Raphael guy who seems to have all the inside info?
Okay, so Dr. Raphael was actually a scholar named Raphael Mściszewski. He was a Czech language tutor to Ferdinand III. Now, he would have known Marcy through their work together at the Prague High Court.
Okay, so he's got connections to both the imperial court and Marcy. But what about this whole Roger Bacon thing? Didn't carbon dating completely debunk that theory?
You're right. We know now that the parchment dates back to the early 1400s, and that's long after Roger Bacon died. But back in the 17th century, Bacon was seen as this super mysterious figure, almost like a wizard. There were all these rumors that he had discovered all these secret, powerful knowledge.
So it's like a game of historical telephone. The story gets more and more embellished with each retelling.
Exactly. And that Roger Bacon connection, it really messed up a lot of the early attempts to decipher the manuscript. People were looking for something that wasn't there. But let's get back to Rudolph II and how he actually got the manuscript.
Right, because even if we don't know who wrote it, figuring out how it was passed down through history might give us some clues about its purpose and where it might have come from.
Okay, so according to Marcy's letter, Dr. Raphael said that Rudolph bought the manuscript from a mysterious messenger. And of course, that little detail has sent imaginations running wild for centuries.
Oh, I bet. Was it like a shadowy figure from a secret society? Or maybe a wandering alchemist with a bag full of secrets? The suspense is killing me.
One of the most popular theories out there is that the manuscript was actually brought to Rudolph by John Dee. He was an English occultist, an advisor to Queen Elizabeth I. He was in Prague back in the 1580s, trying to convince Rudolph to sponsor his alchemy and magic experiments.
Whoa. Wait, John Dee? The guy who was basically Queen Elizabeth's magical consultant? What was he doing all the way over in Prague?
Well, Dee was a fascinating guy, a true scholar of magic. He traveled all over Europe looking for patrons to support his work. He thought that Rudolph, with his interest in the occult, would be the perfect benefactor.
It does seem like they would have hit it off, doesn't it? So, did Dee actually meet up with Rudolph? And is there any proof that he brought the Voynich manuscript with him?
All right, so here's where things get even more interesting. Dee did actually visit Prague, but his relationship with Rudolph wasn't quite what he hoped for. He kind of made a bad first impression, and he didn't end up getting the funding he was after.
So our John Dee connection, it might be a bust.
Not so fast. While there's no direct evidence linking Dee to the manuscript, there is another intriguing piece of the puzzle. Remember Hucheki, Rudolph's favorite alchemist? Well, his signature was found on the very first page of the manuscript.
Wait, a signature on the actual manuscript. That's huge. Tell me more about this Hucheki guy.
Okay, so Hucheki was a really talented alchemist and pharmacist. He was known for being incredibly skilled with herbs and chemicals. Rudolph was so impressed with him that he made him his imperial chemist. Basically, Rudolph kept Hucheki on speed dial for all things alchemy.
So is it possible that Rudolph gave the manuscript to Hucheki as a gift? Maybe he thought, hey, you're the expert with this stuff. See if you can crack this code for me.
It's definitely a possibility, and it seems like Hucheki really liked the manuscript because he signed his name on the first page. He apparently did that with all of his books.
It's like finding a fingerprint at a historical crime scene. So we've got Rudolph, the emperor, who's obsessed with everything occult, acquiring the manuscript, and then maybe passing it on to his alchemist buddy. But how does it end up in the hands of Marce's friend?
Well, after Hucheki died in 1622, the manuscript went to this guy named Georgius Bartius. He was a minor alchemist and a legal official in Prague. And we know this because back in 1999, a letter was found from Bartius to Kircher. And in this letter, he confirms that he owned the manuscript.
Another piece of the puzzle falls into place. So what does Bartius say about the manuscript in his letter? Is he any closer to figuring it out?
He describes it in detail, mentioning all the herbal illustrations and the astrological charts. He's pretty convinced that it's a medical text because of all the pictures of herbs and what he thinks are chemical symbols.
So even back then, people were already trying to figure out the Voynich through alchemy and medicine. It's like those fields have always been intertwined with this book.
Absolutely. And just like Marcy later on, Bartius was certain that Kircher was the only one who could crack the code. He even sent Kircher partial copies of the text, hoping to pique his interest.
So did Kircher ever respond to Bartius's pleas for help? It seems like everyone was desperate for this guy to just take a look at the manuscript.
He did respond, but his reply was kind of a brush-off. He said that deciphering the manuscript wouldn't be that hard for him, but he was just way too busy with other, more important things.
Wow, imagine being so brilliant that figuring out one of history's biggest mysteries is considered a minor distraction.
Yeah, it really shows you how respected Kircher was in the academic world back then. He was doing groundbreaking research in so many different areas. So a weird manuscript from some unknown alchemist probably wasn't very high on his to-do list.
Plus, wasn't Europe in the middle of the 30 Years' War around that time? Things must have been pretty chaotic, even for scholars.
You're right. The 30 Years' War was raging from 1618 to 1648. It was a brutal, brutal conflict. Bartius even mentions in his letter that it's way too dangerous to even try to send the manuscript to Kircher because of the war.
So our manuscript is literally caught in the crossfire of history. Its journey to Kircher delayed by one of Europe's most devastating wars. It's just incredible how all these historical events are tangled up with the fate of this book.
It really highlights how fragile knowledge can be, how easily it can be lost or forgotten in the middle of all the chaos and turmoil.
But thankfully, the manuscript survived. By 1665, the war was over, things had settled down a bit, and Marcy finally felt safe enough to send the manuscript off to Rome.
Yes, and that's where we'll pick up the trail next time, as we follow the Voynich Manuscript into the heart of the Jesuit world. Welcome back to our deep dive into the Voynich Manuscript. When we left off, the manuscript was on its way to Rome, headed straight for the library of Athanasius Kircher.
Yeah, and for like the next couple of centuries, it's like the manuscript just dropped off the face of the earth. I mean, we know it existed, but trying to figure out exactly where it was is a whole other mystery.
It's like a real-life Where's Waldo, but instead of looking for a guy in a striped shirt, we're trying to find a centuries-old book. But even though it was hidden away, we can still piece together some parts of its journey thanks to some dedicated Voynich sleuths out there.
Ah, so we've got our historical Sherlock Holmes on the case. What kind of clues did they manage to dig up?
Well, for starters, we know that Kircher's library eventually ended up at the Collegio Romano in Rome. And while a lot of his books and manuscripts were scattered over time, There's evidence that suggests the Voynich manuscript stayed put.
Okay, what kind of evidence are we talking about here? Did they find, like, a secret note tucked between the pages? Or maybe some hidden inscription that only shows up under a black light?
Nope, the clue's actually in the binding. Originally, the manuscript would have been bound on wooden boards. That was pretty typical for medieval manuscripts. But sometime between 1824 and 1870, a bunch of manuscripts at the Collegio Romano got rebound.
A book makeover, huh? Makes you wonder if they considered anything a bit more stylish than plain old brown. But I digress. So, how does this rebinding help us track down the Voynich manuscript?
Well, Voynich manuscript's current binding, which is parchment, looks a lot like other books that were rebound at the Collegio during that same time period.
So it's like a bookish fingerprint linking the manuscript to a specific place and time.
Exactly. It might seem like a small detail, but it's a crucial piece of the puzzle.
Okay, so our manuscript is chilling at the Collegio Romano, probably gathering dust on some shelf. But then I'm guessing things get interesting again. How does it go from a forgotten book in a Jesuit library to one of the world's most famous unsolved mysteries?
Well, this is where Italian politics come into play. In the mid-1800s, Italy was going through some major changes. They were trying to unify the entire country.
Right, the Risorgimento, Garibaldi, Cavour, all those passionate Italian nationalists fighting to create a unified Italy. But how does any of that relate to our manuscript?
Well, unification had some pretty big implications for the Catholic Church, and especially for the Jesuit order. The new Italian government wasn't exactly fond of the Jesuits, and they started targeting Jesuit institutions, including the Collegio Romano.
Oh, so our manuscript got caught in the middle of a power struggle between the church and the state. That can't be good.
It wasn't good at all. In 1873, the Italian government basically swooped in and seized the Collegio Romano, and they took the library, too.
Oh no, did the Voynich manuscript just vanish into some government archive never to be seen again?
Luckily, no. The Jesuits, being the clever folks they were, managed to save at least some of their collection. They came up with this pretty ingenious plan.
Okay, I'm all ears. Tell me they pulled off a heist, Ocean's 11 style.
Not quite a heist, but pretty close. They started attaching slips of paper with the name of the Jesuit general to as many manuscripts as they could. They basically claimed that all these manuscripts were part of his private library.
Wow, that's actually brilliant. They created a legal loophole to protect their most valuable books.
Exactly. And while we don't know for sure where the Voynich manuscript went during all this chaos, it was probably smuggled out of Rome, along with the other rescued manuscripts.
So it went on the run, dodging the Italian authorities. It's like a real-life book chase.
It really is. The manuscript most likely ended up at the Villa Torlonia in Castel Gandolfo, and it stayed hidden there for a while.
Okay, so the manuscript is safe for now, tucked away in a villa, just waiting for its moment to reemerge. And this is where our friend, the antiquarian book dealer, Wilfrid Voynich, enters the picture, right?
Precisely. Wilfrid Voynich, the Polish revolutionary turned rare book mogul, is the one who brings the Voynich manuscript into the spotlight. And his story is almost as fascinating as the manuscript itself.
All right, I'm ready for this. From revolution to rare books, this guy sounds like he lived a life full of adventure.
Oh, he did. Voynich was born Mikot Voynich in 1865 in Lithuania, which back then was part of the Russian Empire. He was a really bright student, studied law and chemistry, but things took a turn when he got involved in the Polish nationalist movement.
So he's not just a bookworm, he's a rebel with a cause.
Exactly. In 1886, he was arrested for his revolutionary activities. And guess what? He was exiled to Siberia.
Siberia. That's hardcore, but I'm guessing that's not the end of his story.
You guessed right. In 1890, he managed to escape, made his way across Mongolia and China, and eventually he landed in England.
Siberia to China to England. This guy doesn't do anything halfway, does he? I'm sensing a theme here. He seems to be drawn to long, winding paths, kind of like the Voynich manuscript itself.
It's a good observation. And that adventurous spirit, it definitely served him well in his career as a rare book dealer. Once he got to London, he connected with the Polish exile community there. And through a stroke of luck, he found his way into the world of rare books.
So he went from revolutionary pamphlets to priceless manuscripts. That's quite the jump.
It was. By 1898, he had his own antiquarian bookshop in London. Yeah. And he was quickly becoming known for finding some truly unique and valuable items. And it was during one of his buying trips that he came across the Voynich manuscript.
Hold on, so he just stumbled upon it. Was it tucked away in some forgotten corner of a European library just waiting to be discovered?
Not exactly. Remember that collection of manuscripts the Jesuits had saved from the Italian government? Well, they were in talks to sell it to the Vatican in the early 1900s.
Ah, so the Voynich manuscript was about to become a Vatican treasure?
It seemed so, but Voynich, being the smooth operator he was, somehow managed to get involved in those negotiations.
I can just picture him now, with his charming accent and tales of daring escapes, convincing the Jesuits to let him have a piece of history.
We don't know all the details of those negotiations, but we do know they were kept very hush-hush. After 9 years of back and forth, Voynich was finally allowed to buy a few items from the collection, and that included what was simply listed as a miscellaneous 15th century manuscript.
9 years! Talk about patience. He must really believe this manuscript was something truly special.
He absolutely did. Voynich became completely fixated on the manuscript, convinced that it held some groundbreaking secrets. And that conviction just grew stronger when he found that letter from Marcy to Kircher tucked inside the cover.
Right, the letter that mentions the Roger Bacon connection. I can totally see why that would have sent Voynich's imagination into overdrive.
It did. He really latched onto that whole Roger Bacon angle, promoted the idea that the manuscript contained advanced scientific knowledge, maybe even some black magic that was way ahead of its time.
That's some pretty clever marketing, I gotta say. But did anyone actually buy it?
Yep.
Literally.
Well, Voynich tried to sell it for an astronomical price, but no one was biting. He even got William Romain Newbold, a really prominent American scholar, to try to decipher the text.
So, the first serious attempt to crack the code in centuries. What did Newbold come up with?
In 1921, Newbold presented what he believed was a translation. And of course, his translation supported the Roger Bacon theory. He claimed he'd discovered this super complex cipher system. It involved switching letters around, anagrams, even these tiny little notations you could only see with a microscope.
Microscopic notations. This just keeps getting more and more intriguing. So, was Newbold's translation the real deal?
Unfortunately, no. Another well-known codebreaker, John Matthews Manley, ended up debunking Newbold's work. Manley was a U.S. Army cryptographer during World War I, so he knew his stuff. He carefully examined Newbold's methods and found a whole bunch of flaws.
Another dead end. I can only imagine how disappointed Voynich must have been.
It must have been a huge blow. And to make matters worse, his business started struggling after World War I. And then the Great Depression hit.
So our manuscript went from being a potential gold mine to a financial burden. Not exactly ideal.
No, it wasn't. But even with all those setbacks, Voynich never lost his fascination with the manuscript. In his will, he actually made sure it would be sold to a public institution.
It sounds like he wanted to make sure the manuscript wouldn't just disappear into some private collection. He wanted the world to have a chance to study it.
Exactly. Voynich died in 1930, and after his wife died in 1960, the manuscript was finally sold to Hans P. Krauss, an Austrian book dealer.
So another book dealer inherits the Voynich challenge. Did Krauss have any luck figuring it out? Or finding a buyer, for that matter?
He tried. He even advertised it for a hefty sum. But no luck. Just like Voynich, he eventually realized that the manuscript's real value wasn't in its potential secrets. It was in its mystery.
So it wasn't about the destination, it was about the journey.
Precisely. And in 1969, Krauss donated the Voynich manuscript to the Beinecke Rare Book and Manuscript Library at Yale University. And that's where it's been ever since.
Finally, a place where the manuscript can be properly studied and preserved. Yale seems like the perfect home for such an enigmatic book.
It does. And at Yale, the Voynich manuscript enters the modern era. With the rise of the internet in the late 20th century, the way we approach this centuries-old puzzle changes dramatically.
Okay, we're finally entering the digital age. I'm dying to know how the internet transformed the study of the Voynich manuscript. But we'll have to save that for next time on the final part of our deep dive. All right, we're back for the final chapter of our Voynich manuscript adventure. Last time, we left off with the manuscript settling into its new home at Yale, just as the internet was about to change, well, everything.
And the internet has been a complete game changer for Voynich manuscript research. Before, access was limited to just a handful of scholars and researchers. But now, anyone with an internet connection can explore the manuscript's digitized pages, join online forums, and even contribute to the quest for a solution.
So it's like the manuscript went from this super secret, closely guarded document to a global, crowdsourced puzzle. I mean, did this sudden influx of, let's call them amateur researchers, lead to any major breakthroughs?
Well, no one's managed to crack the code completely, but the internet has created a whole new community of Voynich manuscript enthusiasts. They're sharing theories online, comparing notes, and even coming up with completely new ways to analyze the text and the illustrations.
That's awesome. It's like a modern-day mystery society, all working together online to solve this ancient riddle. So what were some of the main theories floating around in these online forums?
Oh, there were and still are a ton of different ideas out there. Some people were focused on the language itself, trying to find patterns in the text that might match up with a known language. Others were more interested in the illustrations, looking for historical connections or hidden symbolism.
So it's not just about breaking a code, it's about trying to get inside the mind of whoever created this thing. Understanding their motivations, why they went through the trouble of creating this complex and mysterious work in the first place.
Exactly. And as the online community grew, so did the resources available for research. In 1996, researchers Gabriel Landini and René Zandbergen started the European Voynich Manuscript Transcription Project. And that project led to the development of something called the EVA alphabet.
The EVA alphabet. Okay, that sounds kind of cool. Is that like some secret code within a code?
Not exactly. The EVA alphabet is basically a way to transliterate the Voynich text to make it pronounceable in English. It's meant to help researchers analyze and compare the text more easily.
Ah, so it's like a bridge between this strange unknown script and something a bit more familiar. Did using the EVA alphabet lead to any new discoveries?
Well, it didn't unlock the manuscript's secrets or anything, but it's been a really useful tool for researchers. It's allowed for more in-depth linguistic analysis. And the collaboration didn't stop there. In 2004, René Zandbergen created the website www.voynich.nu. It's still the most comprehensive online resource for anyone interested in learning more about the Voynich manuscript.
It's amazing how the internet has democratized access to knowledge like that. Anyone with a computer can now dive into this centuries-old mystery and contribute to the research. But what about the more official attempts to decode the manuscript? Have any professional code breakers had any luck cracking the Voynich code?
There have been some really serious efforts, and one of the most fascinating involves William F. Friedman. He's considered by many to be the greatest codebreaker of all time.
Friedman, wasn't he the guy who cracked the Japanese codes during World War II? That's a pretty impressive resume, to say the least.
That's the one. He was definitely intrigued by the Voynich manuscript. And in 1944, he actually assembled a team of top cryptologists to try to crack the code. They called themselves the First Study Group.
Wow, the A-team of code breakers, all focused on the Voynich manuscript. So what happened? Did they manage to break the code?
Well, despite all their expertise, the First Study Group didn't make much progress. They ended up disbanding in 1946. And even Friedman eventually came to believe that the manuscript wasn't a simple cipher.
So even the best of the best couldn't solve it. That's both fascinating and kind of frustrating, you know?
It is. But even though they didn't find the solution, their work, along with the efforts of other researchers like Theodore Peterson and Prescott Currier, paved the way for future attempts at decipherment.
And then, of course, computers came along, which opened up even more possibilities for analysis, right?
And absolutely. Computers allowed researchers to do much more sophisticated statistical analysis of the text. They could start looking for patterns and anomalies that humans might miss.
Okay, but after centuries of scrutiny, both online and offline, what do we actually know, about the Voynich manuscript? Have we learned anything concrete?
We have, and a lot of it is thanks to science. In 2009, carbon-14 dating of the manuscript's parchment confirmed that it was created in the early 1400s, and that finally ruled out Roger Bacon as the author for good.
So that theory can finally be laid to rest. Any other major scientific breakthroughs?
Yes. Material analysis showed that the parchment is actually made of calf skin, not goat skin. And that challenged the idea that the manuscript came from Southern Europe, where goat skin was more commonly used.
So the mystery of the manuscript's origins just keeps getting deeper. What about the ink and the pigments they used for the illustrations? Did those analyses provide any clues?
Unfortunately, the analysis of the iron gall ink and pigments didn't really reveal much about where the manuscript might have been made. All we can say for sure is that it was most likely created somewhere in Europe in the early 15th century.
Okay, so we've got a time frame, and we've ruled out a few theories, but we still don't know what the manuscript actually says. What's the general consensus among Voynich manuscript experts these days? Are there any leading theories?
Well, the theory that's gained a lot of traction recently is that the Voynich manuscript is actually a medical text from the 15th century, and that it was written in a secret script to protect the author's knowledge.
So not a coded message from a secret society or a lost alchemy book, but a simple medical handbook.
Mhm.
That almost seems a little too ordinary, doesn't it?
It might seem that way, but it actually makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
This theory fits with the manuscript's overall structure, the abundance of botanical and anatomical illustrations, and those sections that look like recipes or instructions.
I guess even a seemingly mundane explanation doesn't diminish the manuscript's overall mystique. It's still a testament to human ingenuity, the desire to protect knowledge, and maybe even to create a bit of mystery.
Exactly. And there's one more piece of evidence that supports the medical text theory, although it's a bit controversial. There's a note on Folio 116V, written in a mix of abbreviated Latin and medieval German, and has been tentatively translated as a recipe for a wound plaster made from, get this, goat's liver.
A goat's liver plaster? That's one remedy I think I'll pass on. But seriously, if that translation is accurate, that's a pretty big step toward understanding what the manuscript was actually used for.
It is. And it adds to the growing body of evidence, suggesting that the Voynich manuscript, while still shrouded in mystery, might be more grounded in the practical world of medieval medicine than in the realms of magic and secret societies.
So does this mean we've finally solved the Voynich manuscript mystery?
Not quite. The medical text theory is a strong contender, but it's still just a theory. We still haven't deciphered the bulk of the text, and there's still a lot of unanswered questions.
But that's part of what makes the Voynich manuscript so darn fascinating, isn't it? It's a puzzle that refuses to be solved, a mystery that continues to intrigue and inspire.
Precisely. And even if we do eventually figure out what it says, the Voynich manuscript will always have a special place in our imaginations. It's a reminder that some mysteries are just meant to endure.
So what's the takeaway for our listeners today? Should they fire up their laptops and try to crack the code themselves?
Absolutely. The Voynich manuscript is a mystery for everyone to explore. There are digital versions available online, and there are tons of resources and online communities dedicated to its study. Who knows, maybe one of our listeners will be the one to finally unlock its secrets.
And even if you don't crack the code, the journey itself is pretty incredible. The Voynich manuscript is a window into another time, a glimpse into the mind of an author long gone, and a reminder that some mysteries are just meant to stay unsolved.
And on that note, we're going to wrap up our deep dive into the Voynich manuscript. We hope you enjoy this exploration of history, science, and the enduring power of human curiosity.
Until next time.